Happy New Year, y'all. This is Gemini Brett of More Than Astrology, here to drink a cup of 2019 astrology with you. I'm going to transmit this in a few parts because there are so many things to do. Is it a busy year for you yet? It is for me in very many ways. And I began this year, I guess, professionally in so many ways with a wonderful opportunity recently to present some of my thoughts about the astrology of 2019 to the San Francisco Astrological Society with some peers, Linnea Van Horn and Steve Pincus. And it was a great honor to present there. And, you know, to look at the astrology for a year, I found it to be a tricky task. I started building this presentation and it just grew to become this 400 slide monster. So I kind of had to pick and choose and go through really fast, which was not the best way to present, we can say. But I think I did a decent job. And more importantly, I have an opportunity now to take it at a slower pace and to get into more of the beautiful symbols that I feel are happening in the heavenly realms to help shape the way that we can set our intentions and our own practices to connect to the great celestial conversation and bring it through our terrestrial translation. All right, so we're going to do a little part one here, probably about 40 minutes, and then back to work with me, back to session. So let me share my screen and we'll hop in here. The ball has recently dropped. Happy New Year. 2019, when we reflect upon it, appears to be a year of love. Eros, friends. So be here now is one of the main teachings I have for 2019, because I think one of the most interesting things astrologically for 2019 is, in some regards, it will seem not to exist. I mean, these teachings, be here now, from Ram Dass, the great guru. If we put an astrologer's hat on him, he might say, be here next year, because that seems to be the themes that we are experiencing from the astrological communities, that it's all about 2020 and the great gathering of Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto and Capricorn. Let me show you the last article from the Mountain Astrologer magazine, a great magazine, for the year of 2013. It's the look ahead of 2014 and then 2015 the next year. It's like this: 2017, 2018, 2020. What happened to 2019, friends? We have a whole year ahead of us before we get to these great happenings of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto gathering together in Capricorn. A rare thing, yes. A powerful thing, absolutely. We're even experiencing some of it now. But before we jump ahead and run away from this moment, as sometimes astrology sadly encourages us to do, how not only do we look at preparing for this great celebration in the Capricorn mysteries of heavy players like Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, but how do we experience now, right? And so let's look at this year of 2019. Here's October 18th, 2020. It's one view of when these planets get very close together, because the truth is Jupiter and Saturn won't conjoin perfectly in the sign of tropical Capricorn. Right? Saturn and Pluto come together January 12th, 2020, in about a year. Jupiter and Pluto, November 12th, 2020. Yeah, many months later. But the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is in the sign of Aquarius. And it's the first one there for a long time. It might be one of the criteriums for, or symbols of, the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions were known as the Great Cycle back in the day. They didn't have Uranus and Neptune and Pluto to play with. And so the 20-year periodicity of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions was seen as, in a sense, the most, well, like the longest stretch of the astrological happenings in some ways. And it was very much seen as an indicator of the socio-political happening. So 20 years doesn't seem that long. but it is, right? And more importantly, Jupiter-Saturn will do these conjunctions in the same element for about 200 years and then shift. And with the 4 elements, that means 800 years to go all the way through. So this is a big deal. And I'm not saying we shouldn't celebrate a triple conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto in Capricorn. They get very close, you know, it's visibly close. But again, the perfection of Jupiter, Saturn will be in the sign of Aquarius, December 21st, 2020. And I think that's a thing that we might miss if we bring too much of our focus on this close gathering. And remember, Pluto we can't even see. So if you're a sky-based astrologer like me, the gig is Jupiter and Saturn, right? And this is where they perfect. And it's very close to an occultation, meaning that they're not only aligned in the same zodiacal degree, the first degree of Aquarius, but they have such a similar latitude that Jupiter will almost block Saturn from our view. That won't happen for the northern hemisphere eyes. Jupiter will move just below Saturn. But anyway, to get back to this, it's a big deal, Jupiter and Saturn in the sign of Aquarius. This, in a sense, is the first of the air sign conjunctions that will be the way for the next 200 years. We had a preview of them in 1980-81 in the sign of Libra, but then the 2000 conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn was in the sign of Taurus, tropical Taurus, to end the Earth reign that's been going down for 200 years. And now this announcement in the first degree of Aquarius that we are moving into a new element. All right. Here, the latitude and the declination of Jupiter and Saturn during their conjunction, December 21st, 2020, to express to those of you who know how to read these things that it's a very near occultation, right? It's like an eclipse, but a Jupiter eclipsing Saturn. And it's not exact. We'll speak more about occultations as we move ahead in the astrology of 2019. All right, is this the dawning of the age of Aquarius? What a wonderful question. The last Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the sign of Aquarius, December 31st, 1285, right, about 800 years ago. And you can see Pluto there in the sign of Capricorn, which means not long before then, there was also a triple gathering of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. It's quite a planet party in Capricorn at that time in 1285. But wait, I'm breaking my own suggestion. Be here now. All right. So back to 2019. New Year's 2019. This was the moment in San Francisco. So I show a 0 Aries chart here to make it more global, but really calendar New Year's is very much a local trip. So I had to show a horizon. Here's a Porphyry houses chart to reflect that 6 degrees and 44 minutes. Libra was rising in the city of San Francisco, California, when the clock struck midnight and we entered 2019. But very importantly, you know, when we're celebrating a new year by, well, date and time, not astronomy, it's not going to agree around the world, right? Here's a look at the December solstice in San Francisco, 2018, the sun ingressing 0 degrees tropical Capricorn, which means the sun is due south of Earth, the Earth's southern axis leaning towards the sun in that one moment of the year, right? Which in the northern hemisphere, of course, is the longest night, longest day in the southern hemisphere. But regardless, sun due south of the center of Earth. And that's happening for the entire Earth, right? So I could cast this chart anywhere in the world, and I'm going to see all of the planets in the same degrees of the same signs, like that Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in Sagittarius, etc. Okay? Is that New Year's? March Equinox 2019. I mean, many astrologers will say that the astrological New Year, the mundane New Year, is actually March Equinox. And many will say that's because it's spring and days are getting longer than nights. Well, that's a very northern hemispheric point of view, is it not? I will say this, regardless of where you live on Earth, at March Equinox, the sun is due east of the center of Earth. And east is the place of the rise, the place of new beginnings. So it makes a lot of sense to track a year of astrology from a March equinox, which again, though in San Francisco, Leo will be rising in that moment, which happens about 3 p.m. this year on March 20th, regardless of where you are in the world. So I can shift this to a zero Aries cosmology or contemplation, in a sense, a houseless chart. And just say that, hey, here is that moment. This chart will be the same chart for everywhere on Earth in that moment of time when the sun is due east of Earth's center. So is that a better look at New Year's? Well, be here now. And we do celebrate New Year's, interestingly, very close to a December solstice, don't we? But it's not December solstice. So first of all, from a Northern Hemisphere point of view, why would we begin the year at the time of the longest night? Well, that's when the sun is reborn, just as it is in modern times when we start our days in the middle of the night, which of course is not always 12 midnight on a clock, right? But in the middle of the night about, because that's when the sun begins its climb, right? So spring equinox is like sunrise. December, well, I should say winter solstice is like middle of the night. And that's when days begin growing longer from the yearly perspective, or that's when the day in a sense begins from a daily perspective, because now the sun has reached its lowest, darkest, deepest zone below the horizon. It begins the climb, which becomes evident at sunrise, and then sun reaches the middle of the day. Other cultures have begun their year in the fall or the winter, the summer, have begun their day at sunset or sunrise, right? Sunrise seems to make sense to begin a day there, but many have tracked time with the phases of the moon, and then you want to look after the sun sets, right? So there's a lot of ways to pet the cosmic cat, of course, always. And we, in modern times, for the most part, are tuned into this calendar. So even before really I speak about the astrology, I think these are really, for me personally, fascinating. And I think for astrology in general, imperative contemplations of what is a year. All right, so the quick answer to that is, well, it's the time it takes Earth to orbit Sun. And it's about 365.242199 days long. Great. But when do you start? And why have we decided to start on January 1st? What a trippy thing, right? Close to a solstice, but not quite a solstice. And it's been this way for some time. And time, which really astrology is a study of time. Time is a fascinating contemplation always, right? Anyway, here's the San Francisco New Year's chart for 2019. And you'll see that Mars, over on the right of this chart, in the very first minutes of Aries, which according to the astrological rules of old, is like a homecoming for Mars, right? Amazing. Well, that was not the case at the Greenwich Meridian line, which is the place where we currently and have for some time defined time, right? GMT, right? Mars, you can see here in the very last minutes of the sign of Pisces. So that's just to show that New Year's, clock New Year's, calendar New Year's, if we're working January 1st, it's not a moment in time. It's a very local phenomena. Well, if you're going to come and sit with me for astrology and have a consultation, I will ask you not only when you were born, but where you were born, right? That's something you should do, by the way. I need to buy tea. Anyway, no, let me not joke about that. One of my greatest passions is to sit with people and journey into their own soul song, and to look through their astrological chart with them and listen to it and hear and see how they've painted this amazing dream into reality. So if you would like to sit for a consultation with me, I would be most honored. And you can find me at morethan.astrology.com. Okay. Shouldn't ever joke about our service in this world, right? That's actually, to me, one of the great themes of 2019 and how we're dreaming that forward. So I'm happy to reprimand myself in the middle of my flow. Right. So this isn't a moment in time. It's so much about the where. And I think that's a fascinating trip. I mean, time starts at the Greenwich Meridian line, right? Wrong. In fact, it's halfway through the day. The first New Year's, very interestingly, is at Christmas Island. Why is it named that way? Is this one of the reasons? And you can see here at 12 midnight, January 1st, 2019 in local time at Christmas Island, Mars was at 29.5 degrees Pisces. Moon at 4 degrees and 44 minutes Scorpio, which is rather different than it was in San Francisco. Is this why we celebrate New Year's Day on January 1st? Is it about the Magi, right? The 3 wise men and Epiphany. So I first showed these slides, but in a much faster clip in San Francisco on January 6th, 2019 for San Francisco Astrological Society, a look ahead. And that date, January 6th, is Epiphany. 3 Kings Day, Tres Reyes, yeah, in most of the Spanish-speaking countries, this is when your Christmas presents get unwrapped. That's the big day, you know, and in the mythos, this is when the epiphany of the 3 Magi declaring that the Son had been born and the Messiah came, which happened 12 days after the birth, okay? So this might be why we choose January 1st, because it's halfway between December 25th, Christmas Day, and January 6th, Epiphany. It's pretty amazing to me, you know, when I meet really young babies, because I work in the wonderful astrological tool called secondary progressions, where we relate the days of someone's life to years, as if something that happens when you are, say, 12 days old in spirit is going to happen in matter when you're 12 years old, right? So the declaration of this being to be, you know, the chosen one at 12 days of his life would have caught up by secondary progression astrologically at 12 years, which is the same time that Jupiter takes to orbit the sun. Really 11.86 years, you know, but who's counting? So I think it's pretty amazing that the Epiphany happened and it would have caught up by secondary progression if this thing really went down during this child's first Jupiter return. Anyway, let's return to Jupiter times and that name planet from the Latin, as is the Gregorian calendar, which you know is an update really of the Julian calendar. Our first January 1st as New Year's Day for this level of consciousness that somehow we've accepted to be our calendrical system. And think about how important that is. Our numbers, our words, our language, our calendar, our time, you know, it's really determines so much of our life and so many ways that we experience reality that we don't often contemplate and sink into, which is why I'm spending a lot of time, and hopefully this feels more like an invitation for you to walk this in the woods and have your own contemplations. But I'll say that this whole scene would not have been why January 1st was the chosen day if you think that this was all about the Christ story, because we first experienced January 1st as New Year's in this new Julian calendar in 45 BC, as we consider it to be now. It certainly was not called BC then, because the B of the C had not yet happened. Know what I'm saying? And BC AD wasn't laid down for hundreds of years after. So January, many suggest, was actually named after Janus, who is the god of endings and beginnings. Well, this makes sense, right? The head that looks forward and the head that looks back. I've been thinking a lot and feeling a lot about time and cycles of time recently, because I'm heading back to Mexico this month and next month to lead a retreat and explore some. And I've spent a lot of time, you know, contemplating the Mayan calendars and their incredible cycles of time. So when I first delivered this information on Epiphany on January 6, 2019, on the Mayan Tzolk'in calendar, it's 1 manik, or 1 deer, which I love to see because I'm a deer. I'm 3 deer. And while I don't think we'll speak so much about the Mayan calendars, there's a beautiful study of time and numerology in that incredible transmission of wisdom that's just held in the study of the 13 and 20 and more, okay? But that Zolkin date of 1 Deer for January 6th, it's also in the Ha'ab, which is more of the yearly calendar, 365 days, it was 0 Muwan. We can also look at it in the long count transmissions where it was 130627, and we don't need to do that too much. But I will say that January 1st was a date of 9 Eek, or 9 wind. And so if we want to cross some kung fus and apply the Mayan Zolkin to the Gregorian calendar and say in any way that this will determine the year ahead, there you go. At the bottom of the screen, you will see MayanMagics.com. It's a really cool place. You can go find out the day sign of your birth there. Another link here so you can find out where you were born, not only in the Solkin, but also in the Hab and in the long count calendar. You can see the link at the bottom. It's actually a Smithsonian thing. You just Google search Maya calendar converter, and I believe this will be the first thing that comes up. And I guess that's as much as we'll play down in Central and South America for now. Let's go over to the Asian countries where 2019 will be the year of the Earth Pig, right? But not yet, right? In Beijing, February 5th, 2019, 5:05 a.m. with an Aquarius new moon right at the cross quarter degree, halfway through Aquarius, which is for the northern hemisphere, the halfway point of winter, and the southern hemisphere, the halfway point of summer, halfway between 0 Capricorn and 0 Aries, the cross quarter of 15 Aquarius, year of the Earth Pig, which they are already celebrating in Japan. This is Kamakura, Japan. This is one of my greatest galactic giggles in my explorations of time. Here I am lighting incense and putting it in this incredible pedestal, looking at Buddha who came to these lands from India, you know. And there's this pedal you can see on the left over there. And there's the eightfold geometry, the eightfold path, very much of a Buddhist tradition, this octagon. But then there's the 12 signs of the Chinese zodiac wrapped around it. And so in Japan, it's the year of the Earth Pig. And it actually already began because in Japan, where Buddhism is so celebrated, they're actually working with the Chinese zodiac, but tuned to the Roman calendar. So January 1st is the turning. Instead of working with a new moon before an equinox, an incredible solely lunar criterion for what brings us through the Chinese zodiac year to year, and I think that's enough around that. Although I will say this is a brilliant book. I highly recommend reading for all astrologers and all human beings. One of these little wooden books, I love them so much, and this one by Jeff Stray, The Mayan and Other Ancient Calendars. In fact, it really starts with an exploration of the Babylonian, which became the Hebrew calendar, and it's a wonderful practice for astrologers to understand that figuring out a calendar that works the year but also honors the cycle of the moon is almost an impossible task, and it's a really wonderful thing to see how other cultures have explored this. All right, so Janus, January 1st, ending and beginnings, although some say January actually was named after Juno, goddess of relationship, goddess of love, yeah, who's in Taurus opposite the Scorpio moon at the time of January 1st, 2019, which must be a year for Juno because when we reflect, we see it is a year of love. How about the love of sun by Earth, this great giver of light, you know, this beautiful star that we dance about? And our year, of course, is celebrated when the tilt of our planet is aligned in the same way as it was 365.242199 days before. It's a tricky thing to play with calendars when you have fractions like this, you see. And it is at this time in early January in this year of 2019, January 2nd, when Earth is closest to the sun. The orbits are not circular, they are elliptical. So we have a close point, which happens in early January, right around the turning of the Gregorian year, interesting, and a far point, known respectively as perihelion, closest to sun, and aphelion, furthest from sun, the far point in early July. So it's a pretty fascinating thing, and maybe part of the reason why we celebrate the flipping of the year in early January, because it's when Earth is closest to the sun, and therefore warmest, and in some senses, globally speaking, fastest. Yeah. So we teach that sun moves 1 degree through the zodiac per day, because there's an average 365 and about a quarter days per year, 360 degrees of the zodiac. But truly, it's not 1 degree per day. It's a little bit less on average. But right now, 1 degree and 2 arc minutes per day, the sun's fastest movement through the zodiac, because Earth is moving fastest, because Earth is closest to the sun. Is this why we celebrate the turning of the year in early January? And if we do, should we do so where it first becomes January 1st? Is this the true New Year chart on Christmas? Interesting name, Christmas Island. All right. If so, Mars and Pisces. But be here now. And here I am, recently relocated to the Bay Area, and here I was speaking in San Francisco. So January 1st, 2019, San Francisco, New Year's, the 7th degree of Libra on the rise, Mars in the 1st degree of Aries. Bit of a homecoming, which indeed, if you work with dispositorship, or as they say, rulership, is true also for Jupiter in Sagittarius, Saturn in Capricorn, and in a modern thought, Neptune in Pisces. That's an amazing thing about this year ahead, and we'll look to. But check out the moon here, 16 degrees and 41 minutes Scorpio, which is about a day's travel since 4 degrees and 44 minutes Scorpio on Christmas Island's New Year. All right, be here now. We'll bring it back here. And I want to bring in these asteroid goddesses. I'm looking here suddenly at a 0 Aries chart and just looking at this moment in the world. There you see Juno at the bottom left of the screen, 20 degrees, 38 minutes Taurus, opposite Moon, Ceres, Venus, this passion axis of Scorpio and Taurus. So if Juno truly is who January was named for, let us celebrate this body that has been found, that has now holds her name, this asteroid goddess there somewhere between Mars and Jupiter. And speaking of, we see also Ceres in Scorpio and Vesta in Aquarius and Pallas Athena in Libra at this time. Interesting to see some of the air element come in, because it's the only place you do with the Libra Pallas Athena and the Aquarius Vesta. All right. But we're going to take the asteroids out, because there's so much to talk about when we look at the happenings of the planets between this moment, January 1st, 2019, and this moment, January 1st, 2020. So we'll look at them side by side. And I think this might be the end of part 1. Let me just check the time really quickly, friends. Well, you know, I've got another 15 minutes or so I can commit. I will be right back. I'm just going to play a little song while I grab a device that will help me track the time as we move ahead. This timekeeping device says Tuesday, January 8th, 10:45 a.m. And for some reason, I agree that that is reality. How much do you think about that? Is it a healthy contemplation to wonder how we were born into someone's idea of time? Or should we have a convention? I mean, obviously, I think we need to make some agreement about what type of calendar we should follow. And I personally am not one to say we should abandon a solar year, because I like things like tea and food, and agriculture requires a sincere reverence for the sun, but also for the moon. So I think it's important that we celebrate the solar year, which the Gregorian calendar does, though in interesting ways. We could celebrate this by the turnings of solstice, equinox, and the cross quarters betweens, or however, but that we also celebrate the lunisolar happenings of new moon to new moon. And, you know, many have suggested we just shift to a 28-day month, and 13 of those is a year because it's 364, which is not a year. And the lunation is not 28 days anyway, friends. It's 29.53059 on average. Although right now you're in your slowest lunation of your year, the longest lunation of the year. So it's a very, very confusing thing. And for me, it's actually one of the initiations that opens the portals to a higher level of astrological understanding and practice, is to understand that time is a great mystery and hard to put our finger on. And to, I think, really understand, just as any human being in a culture, how important the conditions of our cultures are, especially the ones that we have not contemplated, which include things like calendar and time. So again, I hope this will encourage another walk in the woods for you of just what is time and what is a day and what is a year. And some of these are very astronomical truths, but again, when do you begin and why? All right, let's play for another 10 minutes, and we will observe some of the amazing heavenly happenings of earth and sky between these two dates 1 year apart of January 1st, 2019 and January 1st, 2020. And I'm looking at 0 Aries charts here to make this a little bit more of a global approach. But I'm also looking for 0 Aries charts cast for the time of San Francisco, California, or Pacific Coast time. So again, we saw in some places Mars was in Pisces, where in San Francisco, Mars was in Aries at the beginning of 2019, and Mars in Scorpio at the beginning of 2020. So amazingly, you know, when we look from this place, these are the two signs, Aries and Scorpio, traditionally associated with Mars. Mars is domiciles, places where Mars makes home. All right, so let's start out there. Now we could go well beyond Pluto and speak with Haumea and Makemake and, you know, Eris, and there's more, okay? But we're gonna go and start with Pluto. Pluto is so deeply connected to the soul. This is an amazing thing. Why do we have to go so far out to find our way all the way in, right? I have to say one thing about this. I feel that our soul is completely a reflection of moon, our moon. And that's a long talk for another time, though I will be speaking about this at length in a star camp in Portland, Maine around June Solstice 2019, and I hope you'll join me. And also much sooner than that, late in January in Mexico City at Ursula Stockter's school. If you want to know more about either of those events, morethan.astrology.com, where they will eventually be posted. But you can sign my mailing list there too, or find my email address if you are near Mexico City or want to come down, or near Portland and want to spend a few days studying eclipses and shadow from light. And I think I'll speak more about that later in this transmission. Pluto's relationship with Charon, the principal moon of Pluto, of which there are a few, but Charon from Pluto looks to be 8 times larger than our moon looks in earthly skies, okay? You may know that the Earth-moon situation is pretty unique. Our moon is like the 5th largest moon in our solar system, and Earth, of course, is nowhere near the size of Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, right? But how somehow our moon is bigger than most of the moon, many, many moons of those planets. It's an amazing thing. So in Pluto, the moon-Pluto experience, the moon-planet experience is actually more similar to the Earth-moon experience than anywhere else in our system. And I think that's as much as I'll say about that now, but I really feel Pluto as Pluto-Charon. And I think that this similarity, and especially in something that's invisible to us, brings us into the incredible, in a sense, invisible dimensions of moon, earth, and that great dance of soul and matter. All right. So where will Pluto dance? He begins in 2019, 20.5 degrees Capricorn, finds his way to 22.5 degrees Capricorn for January 1st, 2020. Though it gets all the way to 23 before stationing retrograde on January 24th of 2019. But basically spending as Pluto moves very slowly, as we know, the year in these first degrees of Capricorn, all in the third decan of Capricorn, which is the 20th degree plus, right? 21st through the 30th degrees of Capricorn. All right, so here are the dates of Capricorn Pluto. Pluto first ingressed Capricorn, January 25th, 2008. That seems very much synchronized to a global financial crisis. Why would that be? These Capricorn structures of structure itself include things like currency. And with Pluto, who's here to completely reshape things, and sometimes through destruction, because Pluto is not afraid to bring evolution in any way necessary, those that are not truly Capricorn will be reassembled, and not always in a pretty fashion. Reassembled. Truly Capricorn, what do I mean by that? All right. So let me show you the synodic cycle of Pluto for this year before I finish that thought. Pluto, Sun conjoined Pluto January 11th, 2019. All right, so this is an early thing that happens this year. It happens every year, Sun Pluto. You can see the next one at the bottom there is January 13th, 2020. And there we might even extrapolate and say, wow, the Sun Pluto synodic cycle is about 367 days. All right. Synodic, synod means meeting. So Sun meets Pluto about every 367 days. And therefore, therefore it's about 2 degrees of travel from one Sun Pluto synod to the next. All right. So you're going to look at these synodic cycles for each of the planets with the Sun. And I probably won't get into too much of them, but I also wanted to build this many slides of this presentation as a resource for folks to utilize throughout the course of this year. And you can get to morethan.astrology.com/free and sign up for the list there, and I will send these slides to you if you would like. There will be a couple conditions which I will express later on during our journey. Just want to express how these things work. It is the proper nomenclature to speak the name of the faster moving planet first when you speak about aspects, and many don't know this. So it's not a Pluto conjunct Sun, it's Sun conjunct Pluto, it's Sun square Pluto. So if you look to the second line here, Sun square Pluto, April 13th, 2019, shortly before Pluto's retrograde on April 24th, which you see at the bottom here. What you see is 23 degrees Aries. Okay, that's where the Sun will be. And I show Capricorn on the right to just remind you that Pluto will be in Capricorn. Pluto's in Capricorn, has been in Capricorn, will be in Capricorn, right? About 2/3 of the way through this journey, which will start in its transition to Aquarius, the next sign, in 2023, though Pluto will dip back into Capricorn for some unfinished business that year, and then commit his journey in Aquarius in January of 2024, but be here now, right? So Pluto is in Capricorn. Now, we can speak about what this means on a mundane level. And I think when astrologers are hired to speak about the year ahead, that's, in a sense, some of the expectation, maybe not. You know, I mean, this to me is a really wonderful contemplation, and just joining other astrologers for a year ahead panel. It's like, well, if astrology truly is a, dialed in science, we're all going to speak about the exact same things, right? And yet astrology, there should be as many astrologies as there are astrologers, I feel personally, and we all have our own passions, and therefore we all are tuned to different frequencies, and we all have different feelings of what happenings will most guide our own way throughout the course on Earth in a year. Now, if we're looking through like mundane astrology, right, how astrology is affecting the world and the political systems, that there's definitely much more of a dialed in science in that regard, I would say. And so we'll speak about that a little bit in our journeys here through these many parts of the astrology of 2019 I plan to record. But mostly what I intend to present when I reflect upon the movement of the planets and the alignments between some of these planets with one another in the year of 2019 is what we can personally do to best align ourselves as talismans. I'll speak more about that later. As personal living talismans to embody, integrate the planetary energy so that we can most utilize their incredible gifts of transformational power. And certainly Pluto and transformational power go hand in hand. Now I show a Tezmacal here, right, which is in Mexico, kind of their version in the Maya, Toltec, Mexica realms and other cultures of what here in the land now called the United States by the First Nations people was practiced as a nipi by the Lakota Dakota, or different names in many tribes for a sweat lodge. Yeah. And I show this for a few reasons. One, to me, it is a great symbol of the truest Capricorn. Capricorn is not an air sign. It's not a blade. It is an earth sign. It is a chalice. It is inherently downward, involutionary, embodiment, feminine. All right. And yet we talk about Capricorn as this great patriarchal shadow government police state situation. Odd. Maybe that's happening because we have not been informed of what Capricorn truly is in this divine, empowered, deep roots of the trunk of the world tree, sipping from the wisdom of the earth that exists in every cell of your body and mine, if we choose to commit ourselves to listening. Okay, so I first began my astrological quest in the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School with Daniel Gemario and Kaylin Castell, who speak to Capricorn archetypally as the council of grandmothers, those devoted to preserving the earth and her true traditions for the future of the seven generations to come. That's a beautiful image. And this to me is something that we are asked to remember. Terence McKenna had this wonderful phrase, an archaic revival, reconnecting to the shamanic traditions, you know. So difficult in the genocide of this land in which I live, which has been, you know, a perversion, a worldwide perversion over the last millennia. And you know, my own kind of blood heritage of people perhaps who were building stone circles in lands far away, I mean, completely eradicated so long ago that it is difficult to connect into that lineage, that stream of ancestry that's so important. The Capricorn mysteries bring us into the roots of the earth, and I will say, therefore, also into the buried ones to connect with our own ancestors. And there are many incredible spiritual technologies that have been celebrated around the world. And this is one common thing that you will see around the world, which is sweating in deep ceremony, in earth ceremony. Tuned to the cardinal directions, you know, in the States, most of Anipi, most of the sweat lodge, the door will be to the west, which is a place where the sun sets, a place where we go into the underworld, a place of death, a place where we connect to the spirits of the ancestors, etc. Right? So my suggestion when I feel into the depth transformation, the reclamation of true earth-based wisdom and of power and personal empowerment for Pluto and Capricorn, yeah, as this transit has been alive for so long, has been activated by Uranus and Aries squaring Pluto and Capricorn for those many years, in some senses still alive. 2012 to 2015 featured 7 exact squares between Uranus and Aries and Pluto and Capricorn. But this is happening now, and it is time for us to devote ourselves to our personal transformation by going into the darkness to find the light, you know? And the Sweat Lodge is one wonderful practice for that. And this, in a sense, is a personal reminder for me to tune back into these teachings, because there are elder teachings of this land, which fortunately have not completely been stricken from the record, and may that never be possible. I believe it is not. And so with reverence and with the head bowed low and connected to the ground and to the ancestors, we can enter this wonderful womb for our own rebirthing. And so I am intent this year on finding my way to practices where I can, with open ears and a closed mouth, receive the teachings of the elders, of the traditions of the land, and reawaken that connection in my own earth vessel, my own body, my own monkey suit, which is so difficult to do when we are distracted by televisions and city lights. Yeah? All right. So rebirthing for us all, and intentional rebirthing and practices with earth traditions and wise elders that are here to preserve the true traditions for the 7 future generations. May we remember that we are the ones we've been waiting for, but that doesn't happen automatically. It will require some work. It will certainly require some grounding. All right. I will show this. This is, in a sense, the greatest evidence of the 2012 date, the December 21st, 2012 date, the so-called end of the Mayan calendar, which was actually the beginning also of a new cycle of one of the calendars. The long count, we call it now. This stone came from Tortuguero, Mexico, very close to Villahermosa in the Tabasco region of modern telling, and was buried under a concrete plant, like literally, after it had been used for target practice. I mean, this is a great symbol of when Capricorn will come bite you if you don't respect, pardon me, the true wisdom and what the ancient ones can. You know, there are 4 books surviving of this incredibly literate culture, the Maya. Anyway, this stele, which came from Tortuguera in the current Tabasco province, spoke of the 2012 date. And I'll speak about that later, maybe in part 2 or part 3 or part 19 of this transmission. But very importantly, this stele was placed in front of a lodge, in front of a Tesmakal, and celebrating 100+ years after the date that great ceremonial space was first established, celebrating that, celebrating the birth of Lord Jaguar, who was the king of that place, and celebrating the 2012 alignment that we'll speak about, because I feel very importantly that it is the most profound celestial happening of our lifetimes, and it is still not happening. It was not just a 2012 thing, so we'll get into that a bit, but I hope we can all get into this. And whether it is a lodge for you or however you want to connect to the wisdom of the elders and of the land and the great tales of the trees themselves and the animal beings, this is a year, and this is a decade, and this is a lifetime, and this is a planet where that is imperative. All right, so this is a good place to stop, number 1, and we'll start with part 2 sometime coming soon to a theater called You, and get into why I will say more than anything else 2019 is a year for working and playing the dream. Thanks for tuning in, friends. This is your friendly astronaut Gemini Brett signing off. I will see you in space.